You know the loop, the thought that leads to the same place, by the same path, at the same time of night. That verdict that has been rendered so many times you can hear it before it's even finished forming. Today, we talk about what happens when that loop finally begins to soften and what the mind does, what it actually does when it finds room to think from somewhere new. Welcome to Patterns to Purpose. Wherever you are right now, in your bed, on the couch, in a quiet room with the door closed, I want you to know that for the next few minutes, you don't have to be anyone. Not the mother, not the spouse, not the woman who holds it all together. Just you. Take a breath with me, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Good. I want to start with the loop because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, even if you've never called it that. The loop is the thinking that goes around and around in the same territory. It might be the thought that keeps returning that same conversation you had weeks ago, replaying what you said, what you should have said, what the other person's tone told you about how they really feel. It might be the low, persistent hum that tells you you're behind in life or in your work or in who you're supposed to be by now. It might be the way the mind reaches almost automatically for the worst case scenario, or the way it reaches for self blame the moment anything goes wrong, as if it's been trained to look for evidence of your own inadequacies. The loop is exhausting, and you know it's exhausting. You may have spent years trying to think your way out of it, telling yourself to stop, to be positive, to look on the bright side, or to just let it go. And you may have noticed that thinking your way out of a thinking pattern doesn't actually work. That's not because you're weak or undisciplined or you're not trying hard enough. It's because the loop isn't a failure of willpower. It's a pattern. And patterns don't end by being fought, they end by being seen. So, what happens when you name the pattern that the loop is running? What actually shifts? Here's what I want you to imagine. For years, your mind has been a house with the television on in every room. You've lived with that noise so long you stopped hearing it as noise. It's just the sound of being alive. The commentary is constant. The verdict is always being rendered. The inner critic is always in the corner, keeping score. And then one day, you walk into one of those rooms and you see the television for the first time as a television. You recognize that it's been playing the same show, the same episode of the same show on repeat. And in seeing it, you gain the ability to do something you couldn't do before. You can choose not to watch. You don't have to turn it off. You don't have to demolish it. You simply have the option for the first time to turn and look at something else. That's what naming does to the thinking mind. It doesn't silence the loop immediately, but it creates a distance between you and the loop, between the woman and the pattern, between the thinker and the thought. And in that distinction, the loop begins to loosen its automatic authority. Let's spend a moment on the inner critic because I know she's been loud in many situations in your life, running a very specific program. The program that says you are not quite enough, not quite there, not quite what you are supposed to be by now. And it's been running so consistently for so long that most of us stopped experiencing it as a voice and started experiencing it as the truth. The critic's voice and the truth began to feel like the same thing. What naming that voice does, what seeing your patterns clearly does, is begin to separate those two things. You start to recognize the critic not as the truth about you, but as a learned behavior, strategy the younger you developed to try to stay safe. If I criticize myself first and harshly enough, no one else's criticism will catch me off guard. If I hold myself to impossible standards, maybe I'll finally be enough. Or if I stay small, quiet, and apologetic, maybe I'll be loved. The critic is trying to protect you. And when you name that, when you can say, this is the critical voice, and this is where it came from, and this is what it was trying to do, something remarkable begins to happen. The voice doesn't disappear overnight, but it loses its automatic authority. You start to hear it the way you'd hear a concerned friend who means well but is working from old information. You can listen without obeying. You can notice without believing. You can let the thought arise and then let it pass. The way you let traffic pass outside a window you're sitting near. This is not nothing. It is everything. Here's what I want to tell you about what the mind becomes when the loop softens. For most of us and for much of our lives, the mind has been thinking defensively. It's been asking, what is safe here? What do they think of me? What will happen if I get this wrong? What does this mean about whether I'm okay? Those are survival questions. They kept us alive in environments where we learned them, and they are not the questions of a woman who is free. When the patterns begin to be named, when the defense loops lose a little of their grip, the mind gets to start asking different questions. Not what is safe, but what is true. Not what will they think, but what do I actually believe? Not what does this mean about me, but what do I want to do with this? The mind begins to think from values rather than from fear. And thinking from values feels entirely different in the body. It feels steadier, quieter, less like a storm and more like a compass. Maybe you've caught glimpses of this already, moments of unusual clarity where you simply knew what you thought, what you wanted, and what mattered. Moments where the noise was temporarily quiet and something clean and true could be heard instead. That clarity is not an accident. It's not luck. It's not reserved for other women or for younger women or for women who haven't made the mistakes you've made. It's what becomes available to every mind that begins to be freed from its loops. There's a phrase I want to share with you. It's mental spaciousness. It sounds abstract, but the experience of it is very concrete. Mental spaciousness is what it feels like when the mind isn't full of the loop, when there's room, actual room for a new thought, a new observation, moment of genuine curiosity, when you can sit with a question without immediately needing to resolve it, when you can tolerate not knowing because the not knowing doesn't feel like a threat anymore. You might recognize it in small moments that are easy to dismiss as nothing. The morning you woke up and for a few minutes the critical commentary hadn't started yet. The drive where you weren't rehearsing the next conversation or replaying the last one. The conversation where you were actually present and actually listening instead of simultaneously managing your own internal weather. Those moments are the mind in spaciousness. And the more you name the patterns, the more you see them clearly and gently and without shame, the more those moments expand, not all at once, not in a rush, but gradually, the way light grows before you notice it's morning. The mind that has been running loops for decades does not become a still pond overnight. Here's what I want you to hear before we go. The loops were not your failure. They were your survival. And the fact that you can now begin to see them, that you're listening to an episode like this one, that something in you is stirring, that some part of you recognizes that what I'm describing, that is not a small thing. That is the mind beginning to turn towards its own freedom. You don't have to rush it. You don't have to force it or perform it or prove it to anyone, including yourself. Just let the seeing begin and let the naming begin. The spaciousness will grow on its own. That is simply what happens when a mind that's been working very hard is finally given permission to rest. May your mind find a little more room today than it had yesterday. May the loops lose a little of their authority, not by being fought, but by being seen. May the inner critic be recognized for who she is, a voice, not a verdict. And may you begin to think, even in small ways, even imperfectly, from the truth of who you are rather than the fear of who you might not be. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who is learning to watch them. Rest well tonight, and I'll see you in the next episode. Love, Tammy.